So now that we've learnt about the different ways that we can use name parameters in Swift functions, let's go ahead and modify our delegate method didUpdateWeather to be more in line with the way that Apple formats their delegate methods. So you can see that the first thing that by convention we always have in a delegate method is the identity of the object that calls this delegate method. So in their case, it's the text field, which triggers the text field did end editing. And in our case, it would actually be the weather manager that does this. So this is obviously going to be of data type weather manager. And we can now separate out our two parameters. Now, notice how they actually have an omitted parameter name here. So we can do the same. And we can add an underscore here. And remember to separate the underscore from the internal parameter name. And we, of course, have to update this in the protocol that defines how our delegate methods are meant to look. So let's update that here as well. So now, when we actually call this didUpdateWeather, you can see that it's telling us that we're missing the parameter for the first input, which is the weather manager. So the weather manager is going to be self, this current object, which is the one that triggered the didUpdateWeather, and is also the one that knows all about the current weather conditions and passes over this weather object. So by using these omitted parameter names, we can actually clean up a lot of our method names and make them more succinct and easier to understand. For example, when we say parse JSON and we're passing in a piece of weather data, now that's quite useful within the function, especially when we want to actually use it to decode. But from outside the function, this is a little bit extraneous. Self.parseJSON, weather data, safe data. I think it's entirely possible to omit that external argument and simply just have parse JSON with this particular data. And in other places, you'll see that Swift likes to use words from English that make the method names a lot more readable. For example, here where we've got perform request URL string, that feels a little bit extra as well. Instead, it would read a lot nicer and be more clear in English at least if we simply said perform request with URL string. So that method name now reads really nicely, and when we call perform request, we can say perform request with, and then we pass in the URL string that we're going to perform the request with. These are all ways of making our code more readable, more easily understood by other programmers and also ourselves in the future. Now, with this in mind, I'm going to go ahead and add one other delegate method. And the delegate method is going to help us be able to pass errors out of our weather manager. I'm going to call the method didFailWithError, and the input is going to be called error, and it's going to be of type error. So now we can trigger this delegate method whenever our code might fail in the weather manager, so that we can notify the delegate, hey, there's an issue here, so that we can pass this error out of our weather manager. And a good place to do that is, for example, here. If during our networking session we somehow, say, lost connection to the internet, went underground, some sort of issue there, then we'd probably end up with an error. So instead of printing it here, we can pass it back to the delegate by saying delegate.didFailWithError and pass in the error object that's unwrapped. And of course, because we're inside a closure, we have to add the word self in front to complete that line of code. Now, down here, inside where we pass our JSON, we can also possibly fail when our data can't actually be decoded successfully. Say maybe we had an issue with the way that we constructed our weather data, or maybe in fact we got a JSON that doesn't even match this format that we've created. So in that case, we're going to catch the error, and we can again call our delegate.didFailWithError, and we can pass in the error that we've caught. So now, back over in the weather view controller, we of course must implement this method, didFailWithError, and we can handle any errors that occur while using the Weather Manager. So the simplest way is to, of course, simply just print the error, but depending on what kind of errors you might get, you might want to relay some of that back to the user. Now, in my case, because the errors that we're getting are couldn't parse JSON or networking errors, I don't think the user is going to understand what that's all about. So in fact, all that we're going to do is we're just going to print the error to the console, and during the testing of our app, say we could switch off the Wi-Fi, switch off the 3G internet, and see if we get any errors that gets printed. In the next lesson, we're going to update the weather that's being shown on the screen.